Chuck Norris stood alone outside a quiet diner, the night air heavy with silence. Suddenly, two cops pulled up, their voices dripping with arrogance as they mocked him. "What's an old man like you doing out here?" One taunted while the other laughed, calling him helpless. Their tone wasn't just disrespectful, it was cruel, humiliating. The crowd that had gathered watched in shock, unable to believe how boldly these officers targeted him. But no one there knew the truth yet. This helpless old man was about to make one phone call that would flip their world upside down forever. The officers circled Chuck with smug grins, their badges flashing under the streetlights as if their power alone made them untouchable. One officer jabbed a finger at his chest, sneering that he was loitering and didn't belong there. Chuck stayed still, his face unreadable, eyes sharp but calm. He spoke little, only short, measured words that carried more weight than their insults. The officers didn't like that. They mistook his silence for weakness and began to escalate, shoving his shoulder, mocking his age, daring him to react. A few bystanders on the sidewalk pulled out their phones, raising them hesitantly as they began to record. Murmurs spread through the crowd, uneasy whispers about the officer's behavior, questions about why an elderly man was being harassed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others looked away in discomfort, but no one stepped forward. The tension thickened in the air, every second sharper than the last. The officers fed on their own arrogance, raising their voices, calling Chuck defiant and disrespectful as they loomed over him. Yet through every insult, Chuck remained composed, his silence almost unsettling. It was as if he was studying every move, waiting, not for their permission to speak, but for the perfect moment to remind them who he truly was. One of the officers finally lost patience and shoved Chuck hard in the chest, forcing him a step backward. The impact echoed louder than the actual sound, drawing gasps from the people watching. Chuck straightened slowly, his calm expression unchanged, but the officers smirked as if they had proven a point. Another stepped in, twisting his arm slightly as though preparing to force him into cuffs, while sneering about his quiet act. They mistook his silence for surrender, mocking him openly, calling him too old to stand up for himself. The crowd stirred uneasily, phones now raised higher, recording every second. Murmurs turned into louder whispers, disbelief rippling through the group of onlookers. People exchanged looks of outrage, asking why these men in uniform were humiliating an unarmed man who hadn't raised his voice, let alone his fists. Still, Chuck gave them nothing. No outburst, no retaliation. He simply stood his ground, eyes locked on the officers with a patience that felt unnerving. His silence was not weakness, but the arrogance of the cops blinded them to it. The atmosphere grew tense, almost electric, as if everyone sensed something was about to break. The crowd leaned in, caught between outrage and anticipation, while the officers kept pressing harder, too arrogant to realize that they were pushing far past the point of no return. The shove still lingered in the air when Chuck finally broke his silence. His voice was low, steady, carrying none of the fear the officers expected. "You really don't know what you're doing," he said, his eyes locked on the men who had mocked and shoved him. The words were not a plea, nor a cry of resistance. They were a statement delivered with the weight of certainty. The crowd hushed instantly, as though the street itself paused to listen. People leaned closer, confused by the calmness in his tone. The officers exchanged glances, irritated but unsettled. They barked back at him, demanding he shut his mouth, calling him arrogant for speaking while in their control. Yet something in the way he spoke gnawed at them. This was not the trembling of an ordinary citizen at the mercy of authority. His stillness, his restraint, felt almost deliberate, as though he was waiting for the exact moment to reveal something none of them were prepared for. Bystanders whispered to one another, questions rippling through the crowd. Who was this man who spoke so fearlessly while cuffed and shoved? What kind of person could stand in humiliation without anger, and yet still command silence with a single sentence? The officers, blind to the growing tension, smirked as though they had won. But the unease spreading through everyone else suggested the opposite. The suspense thickened. This was not weakness, this was something else. Something hidden just beneath the surface. And the question now hung heavy over everyone watching. Who exactly was this man they thought they could break? Chuck lifted his head slowly, his expression calm but commanding. "Give me my phone," he said firmly. The officers burst out laughing, mocking him in front of the crowd. "What are you going to do, old man? "Call your grandma," one sneered, but something in Chuck's tone left them uneasy, and with arrogance dripping from their smirks, they tossed the phone toward him as if to humiliate him further. Chuck caught it without flinching, his hands steady despite the cuffs biting into his wrists. He pressed a button, placed the phone on speaker, and his voice carried with crisp authority. "This is Chuck Norris. Connect me to the Pentagon." The effect was immediate. The crowd fell dead silent. Phones lowered slightly, then shot back up as people realized they were witnessing something far greater than a routine arrest. Even the officers froze mid-movement, their mocking grins dissolving into confusion. The name rang out like thunder, Chuck Norris. Whispers surged through the bystanders, disbelief spreading like fire. "Did he just say Pentagon?" one murmured, clutching his phone tighter to record every second. The street transformed into a stage of stunned faces, every eye locked on him. The line clicked, and the low hum of a secure channel filled the speaker. A professional voice answered, "Pentagon, who is this?" Chuck's response was sharp, unwavering. "This is Norris. I need immediate verification." The words echoed in the tense air, and suddenly the dynamic of the scene shifted entirely. The officers who once shoved and mocked him now stood stiff, unsure whether to move or speak. The crowd could feel it too. The sense that this man was no ordinary victim, but someone whose reach and authority could shake the very ground these cops stood on. Silence dominated, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the power no longer belonged to the men in uniform. The hook snapped into place. He wasn't just anyone, and everyone present knew their world was about to turn upside down. The speaker crackled, and a commanding voice came through. Chuck's tone was steady, calm, but carrying weight that silenced even the murmurs of the crowd. "This is Chuck Norris, senior military advisor. I am being unlawfully detained." The words hit like a hammer. Gasps rose from the onlookers. Phones trembled in the hands of those recording. On the other end, the Pentagon officer's voice roared with thunderous authority. Who dared lay hands on him? The fury in his tone reverberated through the speaker, sending a chill across the street. The crowd flinched at the power behind the words, while the officers froze completely, their faces drained of color, the arrogance that once fueled their every move evaporating into raw panic. One officer's hand, still hovering near his holster, twitched nervously before he quickly dropped it. Another stumbled back, stammering incoherently. Whispers from the crowd turned into an audible roar. "They handcuffed Chuck Norris. Do they even know who he is? This is insane." The disbelief echoed from every corner, and suddenly the officers who had stood so confidently now looked like children caught in the act of their worst mistake. Sweat broke across their brows as the Pentagon voice thundered again, each word like a verdict. "You will release him immediately, and you will answer for this." The shift was undeniable. Just moments earlier, Chuck appeared like a helpless victim, mocked and manhandled by men who thought they had all the power. Now the entire scene belonged to him. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every detail as the officers' panic deepened. They were no longer in control. Their careers, their reputations, and their freedom hung by a thread, unraveling in real time. The power reversal was complete. The same people who once smirked at an old man now stood cornered, exposed, and trembling before the world. And in the center of it all, Chuck Norris remained unshaken, calm as stone, commanding the storm that had turned against them. Sirens pierced the night as additional police units screeched onto the scene. The moment the new officers stepped out, their eyes widened in shock at the sight before them. Within seconds, recognition lit their faces. They snapped to attention and saluted Chuck with utmost respect. Their demeanor the complete opposite of the arrogance that had dominated only moments earlier. The corrupt officers who had mocked him stood frozen, their faces pale, sweat running down their temples. Their own colleagues moved swiftly, turning the very handcuffs they had used against Chuck back onto them. The metallic clicks echoed loudly in the air, each one a symbol of humiliation and reversal. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts, capturing every second on their phones. Whispers spread like wildfire. "They're arresting their own. This is unbelievable. Justice, finally." The same bystanders who had watched in uneasy silence now watched with relief, their tension melting into awe as justice unfolded before their eyes. The officers who had once strutted with authority were now shoved toward the squad car, their heads bowed, no trace of the arrogance they once wore so proud. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The crowd that had seen them abuse their power was now witnessing them stripped of it in the most public, humiliating way possible. And at the center, Chuck remained composed, calm, and unshaken. What had begun as an image of helplessness had transformed into a living lesson. Corruption crumbles when confronted by integrity and true authority. Justice had not only been served, it had been delivered in front of everyone. Undeniable and unforgettable. The street had gone silent, the weight of what just happened sinking into everyone present. Chuck stood tall, his calm presence commanding more respect than any badge or uniform ever could. He looked directly at the crowd, then at the officers who had once mocked him, and spoke in a steady, unwavering tone. Power without honor is destruction. His words cut through the night air, leaving no room for doubt, no space for excuses. With that, he turned, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and walked back toward his car. The flashing lights from the patrol vehicles reflected across his face, but his expression remained composed, untouchable. Every eye followed him. Every phone stayed raised, capturing the image of a man who had turned humiliation into justice with nothing more than calm authority and truth. The crowd stayed frozen, the stunned silence lingering long after he left. Bystanders exchanged looks, whispers rising again, this time filled with awe and respect. The corrupt officers, now cuffed and broken, stood as living reminders of what unchecked arrogance could lead to. As the scene settled, one question hung heavy in the air, reaching beyond the moment itself. What would you have done if you witnessed it?